Ever wonder how some people manage to read 100 plus books every year? How they can find hundreds upon thousands of books to add to an ever-growing exciting pile? Yet you struggle to even crack open one book a year and actually sit down and read. Never fear, because I'm about to let you in on the secret to becoming fully booked. Welcome to Fully Booked, the bookish podcast where I'll chat about all things book and reading related. Whether you're a new or a pro reader, there's something for everyone to learn. I'm here to help you on your reading journey and find that next great read that will keep you fully booked. Hello readers, and welcome to episode 14 of Fully Booked. I'm your host Natalie, and today's episode will be on how to become fully booked in 2024, or as the title says, how to become a reader, and in parentheses, actually finish more than one book a year. Now, ideally, this feels like a topic to tackle at the start of the year on the podcast, so you can then apply this advice and consistently read throughout the whole calendar year. But since I only started this podcast in August of this year, and I didn't want to have to wait till January, I'm going to talk about this topic now and live by that famous saying, the time is always now. And hey, if I can help you read even a book or two before the end of the year through this episode, then I've done my job. Anyways, back to the topic at hand, and a warning now that this episode might be another doozy, so you might want to get busy or get comfy to listen. Okay, I'm going to be honest here. I put off scripting this whole episode for a while because, unlike my reading wrap-ups or TBRs, there's no clear or one direction that I can go with these topical episodes. And especially this one, as there are many ways you can go about becoming a reader. But before we get to that, I wanted to answer the question of why should you read? Or why would you even want to read with the plethora of entertainment out there, i.e. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, for those of my older listeners who use it still. Well, I have some reason to show you why you should read and how reading is good for you. Did you know that reading has many great benefits such as strengthening your brain, reduces stress, as well as other symptoms of depression? It increases social and other soft skills such as empathy and communication. It can increase life longevity and even improves your sleep quality. And now that I think about it, while reading used to be a purely isolated activity, it's becoming more social than ever in the digital age, with platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube becoming huge breeding grounds for sharing book content and creating spaces for people to discuss their favorite books and bookish topics. There's really less reason to feel so alone in this beloved activity nowadays. There seems to also be a rise in book-specific platforms like Goodreads, Storygraph, and Fable, which make it easier for people nowadays to share reviews, join reading challenges, track reading habits, and make friends through app built-in online book clubs. Honestly, I can think of worse ways to spend my time in this day and age, so I don't know about you, but I'm definitely sold on getting into reading. But for real, after hearing those reasons, who would want to try picking up a book? Unfortunately, it can be really hard to break habits in our daily lives like watching TV or doom scrolling on social media. But it is possible to build and break habits according to James Clear's 4 laws, which, by the way, I know by now there are probably many summaries that you could read instead, but I would strongly encourage you to pick up his book Atomic Habits, as it's well worth the read, and it's actually one of my few 5-star reads. So, with that in mind, I'm going to give you my top 8 tips for how to start reading and stay interested. Tip number 1, figure out your why for reading. There are many different reasons people have for wanting to read. Some might be more on the side of escapism and exploring various literary worlds, elements, etc., while some might be wanting to learn or up their skill game for their job/career or other real-life endeavor. And some might just want to find something that gives them a feeling to emotionally connect and find pleasure in. And there doesn't have to be one singular reason for reading. You could have a mix of these ones that I mentioned. But I think figuring out a main reason to start is good so that you have a basis to help you choose what and what not to read. And there are definitely some books that I might avoid as a new reader, but I'm able to pick up now that I'm well in my reading era again. And of course, your reasons might change as you progress through your reading journey, and that's when you can really start to diversify your reading. But for starting out, it's totally okay if you're only reading business nonfiction or contemporary romance, i.e. My Husband versus Me. But anyways, there's not really any bad reasons to want to read if you really think about it, and you'll be getting so much just by picking up a book. So now that you figured out your why, how does one actually start reading? This leads into my next tip, tip number 2, start small to build up the habit and set a daily goal. So in 2021, I read 4 books. In 2022, I read 25 books. And last year in 2023, I read 77 books, all according to my Goodreads. Now, I didn't get to those numbers by sitting around and not doing anything about it. I really had to work my way up to make reading a regular part of my routine again, and you can do this too. Now, a lot of people will recommend either setting a time or page goal. So for example, you could say, I will read 20 pages a day, or I'll read 10 minutes a day. Personally, I prefer to make time goals as I'm not the fastest reader, and depending on the book I read, 20 pages could take me 20 minutes, or it can take me an hour, depending on how much I'm going back and trying to process, which is something I want to improve on for the future, but back to the point. Plus, it's easy to set a timer when you start reading, and once it goes off, you know that you've at least met your goal for the day. I honestly don't remember if I set a specific time goal or not back in 2022 when I started back on my reading journey, but I have used this method time and time again throughout my journey, and it really works. And I found that once I started picking books I could really get into, 10 to 20 minutes flies by and isn't nearly enough time a day to read. And instead of sitting down for timer, you could pair your reading with another habit or part of your routine and read for as long as you're doing that other habit/activity. If you commute to work, you can try to read during that time. But please use audiobooks if you're driving yourself. Do not try to read a physical book or on e-reader on the road if you were the one driving. Just wanted to put that out there. And I also do remember that when I went back to school in 2022, a lot of my reading was done on the bus to campus, as it used to take me about 20 minutes to get from my apartment to school and the other way around. Or maybe you have another time in your day where you'd prefer to sit down and really read and focus, like with your morning cup of coffee, lunch break, or maybe to wind down before bed. Whatever you choose, find something that works best for you and stick with it. And feel free to experiment as much as you need in the beginning to find what works. Now, something else that is going to help you start reading is tip number 3, replace screen time with reading. Now, screen time includes social media, i.e. Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, although question, are people still using that in 2024? Watching YouTube, binging Netflix, Prime, Hulu, not for Canadians though, Disney Plus, etc. The list goes on nowadays. And to be honest, I don't have an easy fix or additional tips for how to reduce your screen time. Most of my tips personally relate to mobile, as for me, I used to have all my streaming apps on my phone and watch my TV shows literally everywhere. And I mean everywhere. I'm gonna get real. I'm one of those people who has no shame about doing all kinds of business on the toilet. And I know some of you out there do this too, let's be honest. So, one way I stopped watching TV is by deleting my mobile apps and only watching on my home TV, which did help because now I tend to only watch TV on my lunch breaks or weekend evenings and not most other times of the day like I was before. Another thing that helped me reduce screen time was setting time limits on my social media apps. I'm not sure how it works on Android, but on iPhone, you can set app limits in your phone settings so that if you go over the allotted time, you will get a notification or like a warning when you try to keep the app open or reopen the app that your max time is up. And at the least, this made me more aware of how often I was going on social media or other apps, especially when I hit the time limit early on in the day. Now, I will say, avoiding social media, especially Instagram, is a bit hard for me currently, as I actually spend a lot of time posting from my podcast account nowadays. But overall, on the personal side, I feel like I spend way less time doom scrolling, or if I am scrolling nowadays, it's more so to get content ideas and research for this podcast, and not just looking at cute dogs and other animals online. Oh, and one more thing, which again, I'm not sure if and how you can do this on Android. Turning your phone on focus mode on iPhone is a huge help, and they even have a reading category now, which you can either manually turn on or schedule it for certain times a day. I pretty much live with my phone on focus mode 95% of my day now, I would say. And not having notifications going off continuously has overall brought me a lot more peace and lessened distraction to a great extent during the day. So I have more time to do things like reading. I think ultimately the main takeaway here is to set limits. And honestly, the more you get into reading, the easier it gets to not have screen time, as you won't even want to watch all the stuff that you used to. And once you really get in the zone and reading becomes a very regular part of your everyday life, this next tip can be helpful, which is tip number 4, track your reading and other habits. If you're at all like me, you might find this to be pretty tedious at times, and habit tracking in itself is a habit and takes up time in your daily routine. But I find when starting out with a new habit, it can be an extremely helpful practice to be able to kind of visually see how much or frequently you're reading. And it can either be encouraging if you're sticking to and hitting your goals, or you could try to figure out how to improve if you're not meeting your goals. And the reason why I say to track other habits is because, likewise to what I just discussed above about screen time, we have a lot of habits and things we have to and or want to do in any given day, which takes up time. And maybe not all your habits are as necessary as you may think, or you might be able to find ways to cut down time on certain habits. But you really need to see and know how much time you're actually spending doing these habits. Now, you can go about making as simple or complicated of a habit tracker as you want. I'd suggest to start making a simple table and list out all your daily habits. From there, you could also choose to either simply check off what habits you do or don't do, or you can put in time spent in minutes/hours for certain habits. Either way, if you do this for weeks, months, you'll start to get a really good idea of how you're spending your time and what you tend to gravitate towards. And I would be very specific about your habits. Like, for example, list watch TV and watch YouTube separately. And I use those as an example because that's a personal one. I tend to consume a lot of TV and YouTube on a daily basis, so it's been helpful for me to track or see how much time I'm spending on both. And likewise to what I talked about in tip number 2, you can start small with cutting back your other habits to up your reading, and even half an hour less a day can add up to a lot more reading time throughout the weeks/months, which I feel like obviously shows in my reading journey over the past 3 years, seeing how much I've been able to read. Hey readers, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far, and hear me out before you hit skip. I'm so grateful for all my listeners who are with me on this reading journey, and I'd like to ask that if you haven't yet, please leave a rating and review as it helps others find the podcast. Also, please consider supporting the podcast financially as it helps me bring you more exciting content, and you'll get some extras like bonus and subscriber-only episodes, early access to new episodes, and much more. The link to donate will be in the show notes below, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/fullybookedpod. Thank you so much again for choosing to listen to Fully Booked, and now back to the episode. Okay, so my next tip is a really great one if you normally consume a lot of movies and TV shows, and that is tip number 5, read books that have movie/TV adaptations. Did you know that films based on books make up 70% of the top 20 global grossing films in 2023? And in 2024, there were at least 102 book-to-screen adaptations, and there are even beloved video games based on books. That's a lot of media first based on books, which also means if you have any beloved movies or TV shows, or like I said, even video games, chances are at least one of them is based on a book, which you can try reading. Since you already know and have more familiarity with the basic plot, characters, world, etc., it will be much easier to dive into versus blindly picking a book off the shelf. Of course, there are always some differences between book versus screen, so you should be able to find something new to enjoy, even if the adaptation did stick closely to the book. Even I've gone backwards a few times and watched the movie/TV show before reading the book, but this is a bit rarer for me personally. Alternatively, if you have a TV show/movie that you haven't watched yet and want to read the book first, I find getting to watch the adaptation afterwards is a huge reward for finishing the book and usually motivates me to finish faster. I actually did this past year with rereading the Hunger Games series, and I'm hoping to do it again with reading and then rewatching the Divergent series because there's something so fun about getting to watch and compare after you've read the book. I will say, I'm not going to try and give recommendations here as there are millions of shows and movies out there that I could suggest or talk about, and some that are still or not yet even in production. And that's not really the point of this episode. However, perhaps that would be a fun idea for future episodes, so I have more time to delve deep into certain genres and give you guys good, specific recommendations. Alright, so this next tip is extremely helpful if you find you're a very busy person and don't have a lot of time to actually sit down and read, or if you're more of an auditory learner, and that is to listen to audiobooks. So, like I just said, if the act of visually reading a book is more challenging for you, audiobooks are a great way to consume books nowadays. And yes, it still counts as reading. It's also a great hack for reading books faster since you can adjust the reading speed and or even hybrid read if you have another copy of the book. Audiobooks can also be way more engaging depending on the voice narrator than reading the physical or ebook by itself, especially when the author or actors from an adaptation are themselves narrating. For example, I recently finished Prince Henry's memoir Spare, and reading the physical copy bored me to tears for some reason, and I soft DNF'd the book after reading the intro late last year originally. But I recently got the audiobook on Libby and was absolutely riveted listening to it. It literally made me want to wash dishes and fold laundry, so I had an excuse to listen to it. And the sound production quality overall is getting better nowadays with inclusions of music, sometimes original, if there is any in the book, little interview sound bites, having a whole cast of narrators, etc. I will say, I'm personally a more visual learner, so I do find I retain less information when I listen to a book only on audio, which is why I usually opt to read nonfiction memoirs currently when I do listen to audiobooks. But if you're more of an auditory learner, then audiobooks really might be the way to go for you. And with that, on another auditory related note, my next tip is tip number 7, pair music with reading. Again, this is sort of an extension to what I said above in tip number 2 and pairing habits, but specifically, listening to music can be really beneficial while reading. Particularly, instrumental music can be immensely helpful in improving concentration on your book while not having to get caught up in focusing on the lyrics. However, for those people who are able to tune out their lyrics, book playlists have also become extremely popular nowadays, especially in the romance genre where a lot of authors themselves are including their own Spotify curated playlist at the start of a book for readers to go and listen to while reading. And I honestly find it more strange nowadays to read in silence versus having some sort of background noise. And music especially always helps me to relax and improve my mood. Of course, there are hundreds of thousands of playlists on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you listen to music to look up and go explore for yourself. Again, on the start of your journey, experimenting is always a good idea to see whether you like pop, lo-fi, cafe ambience, or even 8-bit Final Fantasy. That one's in reference to my husband, FYI, or anything else in between. And my final tip to help you stay interested in reading is tip number 8, do buddy reads. Even if you're able to start a book, sometimes sticking with and finishing can be hard depending on a number of factors. But having accountability gives you a much higher rate of success, so what better way than to have a reading buddy? Of course, this can be easier said than done if you're like me, and most of your friends either don't read or only read nonfiction. Although I have found ways to make new book friends lately, which has helped. But if you're in luck and have a friend who will agree to read with you, this is a good way to stay on track since you'll have someone to talk to. And then you can decide from there how often you want to check in with each other, whether you want to text only or meet up in person to discuss the book, and come up with reading deadlines together. I honestly wish I could do more buddy reads, as I tend to put books to the side if another book looks more exciting and is capturing my attention, and then go back and forth between too many books. And this is a huge problem since I read multiple books at a time on a regular basis, and honestly gets quite chaotic. I feel like buddy reading can also be more fun as you can really up the game and plan book-related activities like watching the movie/TV show together afterwards, if there is one, book trivia, having a themed party, etc., which also makes it way more motivating and then rewarding to finish the book. FYI, there's definitely some common themes going on between all the tips I've discussed, if you haven't noticed. Anyways, the possibilities are endless. And if you don't yet have a buddy to read with, I do have some solutions for you, but I'm going to save those for another future episode, so stay tuned. And so that wraps up my How to Become a Reader episode. Whew, I gotta say before we go, this episode was really one in the making. It's actually the first episode I wanted to release since I started the podcast, but kept pushing and pushing it back because I didn't know when I could fit it in this year. But hopefully that helps give you a head start on your reading journey, and I'd love to hear from you via my socials if and when you start reading, and what book you're excited to start first. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you back here for episode 15. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you were able to take away something, and be sure to follow the podcast for more bookish content. Until next time, stay fully booked, and I'll talk to you soon.